Hello, welcome to Ag Communications, Environmental Communications 712. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about community-based social marketing and communication channels, which community-based social marketing is what you're reading about in your McKinsey Moore text, so I'm sure you're pretty familiar with it, but I thought I would do an overview of what it is to kind of give you a basis for the things that I'm thinking about when we plan our final communication campaigns. So with that, let's get a little bit started here. The very first thing I want to talk about are the 6 major elements that are involved in community-based social marketing. So it's important to note that there are 6 major elements. The very first of those is commitment. So you want to start by asking people to do something that isn't such a big deal. You can ask them about a smaller commitment, and then that smaller commitment will lead to a larger commitment later. So I have some examples here. You could ask students and faculty on campus to wear a button saying that they recycle. So that's an outward sign of that commitment. It's also been proven that public signs of commitment are more effective than private signs of commitment. So wearing that button and kind of saying that publicly that I'm willing to recycle and that I do recycle may make people think twice before they don't do that behavior. That they're really interested in changing. A second example there is maybe sign a contract. Of course, we want to sign that in public in some way so that they're held accountable for that publicly. To maybe take canvas shopping bags instead of using plastic for the next 3 months. And that time frame is important. It's really hard for us to say, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. But I might be able to commit to saying that I'm going to do something for the next 3 months, or I'm going to do something for the next 2 months. Now, of course, we hope that that commitment will work into a lifelong commitment, but it's difficult for somebody to say up front, I'm going to do this for a lifetime, where it's a little bit easier for them to say that they're going to do it for a shortened time period of some kind. It's also important for us to have recommitment stages along the way, follow-up calls, asking how people are doing, and those kind of things. The next step, we're having issues there. The next step in community-based social marketing are prompts. We all need little reminders. I have tons of sticky notes all over my desk to remind me to do things all of the time. And those are things that are important to me and I want to do them, but I just may not remember without a reminder. And the same is true. The principle of community-based social marketing is that we're all social beings and we interact and we perform better with people around us. So prompts are an important part of that, to remind us to do the things that we do want to do as social beings. So an example there are maybe eye-catching signs placed on recycling bins to remind students and faculty of their commitment to recycling. We can also have signs provided to people to put in their house to maybe remind them to take those canvas bags to the store. I've also seen some of our grocery stores include reminders about, did you forget your canvas bags in your car? So that way you remember them before you actually reach the grocery store itself. So things like that can certainly help. The next major element to community-based social marketing are norms. There are cultural norms all around us. Those are just the things that happen in the world around us. And some communities, recycling is the norm, and in some communities it's not. And the same are true with agricultural practices, as we're talking about possibly changing some of those agricultural practices in our communication campaigns. They're very, we've done this way, we've always done this way. So when you're seeking to change norms, you really need to provide evidence that the norms are already changing so that people feel like, okay, I need to be a part of the new norm. So one way to do that is certainly to gather opinion leaders, people in the community that are well respected, and ask them to try a behavior first and commit to a behavior first. And then that may shift some of the people around them, and gradually you get a mass of people, and this is the new norm finally. So examples on our recycling example, stories in the campus newspaper about the growing number of students and faculty recycling. No one wants to be the last one. Everyone wants to be a part of that community and a part of the social norm that's happening. And the same can be true with agricultural practices. Maybe stories in the local newspaper related to the increase in canvas bag use in Manhattan. Probably one of the most effective ways to change these norms are just seeing people around you doing these things. So as you see farmers around you implementing a new practice, or as you see people in the grocery store with their canvas bag, then you realize, I should be doing those things too. And you certainly may look around and say, oh, I'm the last one that's not doing these things. And then you're even more likely to come on board as the social being that we really are. The next major element is communication. It's really important, obviously, for us to have communication and to have a back and forth and open dialogue about why things are important. So in our recycling example, teachers in their class could discuss the importance of recycling when they're discussing other topics. Again, that's a part of that cultural norm and bringing up that conversation over and over again. You can also have community leaders discuss the importance of the reusable shopping bags in that example. Again, this is a time for us to have our opinion leaders out there on the ground. In many cases, for your communication campaigns, I suspect that you'll want to involve extension agents in some way, because they really are our eyes and ears in the ground in the communities around the state of Kansas and the state of Oklahoma, as well as the state of Texas, which is kind of the area that we're really working in as the Southern Plains hub. So those are important elements for us to consider. Just using those people to increase our communication efforts as a part of that social process. The next element is incentives. We all need to be incentivized sometimes. Sometimes for the good of the community is perhaps not enough. So think of ways that you can provide incentives. For our recyclables, perhaps provide students with a discount on soda if they bring in their recyclables. For our canvas bags, provide students and faculty with free canvas bags to carry their groceries. On this campus, maybe they have a Power Cat on them. That's certainly an incentive here to have things with our purple Power Cat on top of them. But as you think about people changing their agricultural practices or getting on board with some of the issues that we're discussing in our campaigns, there may be other types of incentives. Possibly we could direct them towards USDA programs already in place to help promote conservation or to help promote soil health, or to help promote effective water usage, where maybe they can actually receive some monetary incentives for implementing some of the practices that are already good for them. The next and final step is really remove external barriers. Sometimes people want to do things. They really do. They want to be a part of the community. They want to be a part of the norm, and maybe the incentives are in place, but perhaps there are just some external barriers to them participating. So, perhaps with our recycling example, maybe there just aren't enough locations for recycling. So maybe we need to add more locations where that's a possibility. In the case in some of your communities, as you build your data and you look at your research, possibly some of your transcripts had some information related to what the barriers were for farmers either believing that this is a problem at all, or what are the barriers for them participating in campaigns to address the actual behavior change that we want to see in communities. And so hopefully we're able to pull out some nuggets of that and be able to determine how we can eliminate some of those barriers. Because if there's a physical barrier in place of some kind, we aren't going to get very far with the other steps if we don't remove that barrier. All right, another important part of developing a strategy related to community-based social marketing is that we really want behavior change. That's what the entire theory is about, is that we want to change people's behavior. So we have behaviors here that we want to encourage, and we have behaviors that we want to discourage. And we certainly have those barriers that we want to remove in order to encourage, and barriers to remove to discourage activities as well. And the same with benefits. So this is almost kind of polar opposites pulling at each other in order for us to really seek that behavior change we want to see. Developing an effective community-based social marketing strategy is predicated on first having selected an end-state non-divisible behavior. So as you're looking at your issues, you really need to identify what is the behavior that I want to change, and is that the end-state non-divisible behavior? Because it's complicated to just say, I would like for communities to reduce their water usage. That's a little bit too big. That's not one in-state non-divisible behavior. However, if you put something like a percentage on it, is you want every county to reduce their water usage by 5% over the next 4 years, well, that is very end state. That is the final thing that you want them to do. So make sure you advocate for that final thing and make sure it's not divisible. So there aren't multiple things. It's so much easier to develop messages and develop strategies if those behaviors aren't divisible. And then certainly having identified and prioritized the barriers and benefits in order to market that to your audience. All right, let's go over some strategy principles related to community-based social marketing. So you really need to select tools based on those barriers and benefits. So what are the benefits to producers for participating in these programs? And what are the barriers? How can you remove those? How can you identify those? And scrutinize your design with focus groups. In the case of our strategy, we actually are utilizing already existing data. So we're utilizing some focus groups on the front end that have already been done with our target audience. So it's a little bit back end that we're getting it, but it might be helpful if you were planning a strategy in the future to do focus groups after you'd identified some of those barriers and benefits yourself to confirm those or reconnect those with your audience. And then you really want to pilot your strategy. So for our instance, we aren't going to have the time to pilot our strategy, but the next step will be to pilot the strategy after our class is over. And then we'll certainly do some evaluation and corrections. Okay, it's really important to remember a few key points of commitment strategies involved in community-based social marketing. The very first is that written is preferred over verbal. Of course, we want it public in some way, but people feel like if they sign something, if they do something, then that's a little more commitment on their part as opposed to saying, yes, of course, I'll do that, no problem. They feel like if they sign something that there's something to adhere them to do that, a contract of sorts. It's also important to recognize people's self-perception. Do they want to be perceived as someone who does the behavior that you want to change? So seeking that self-perception is really important. And that small request can hopefully become a larger request later. So asking them to make a small commitment for the next 2 months, for the next crop season, is important for them to then move forward with making that a lifetime change. Make it active. Call them back. Be involved. Certainly that should be a part of your strategy as you build that there have to be some checks. And possibly you're going to use your extension agents to be able to create those checks and create those incentives and check in on people and see how they're doing. And make it easy for them. The shower flow restrictors that your book talks about, they were too complicated. It wasn't easy for people to use. So you have to make sure that you make it easy for people to use or they're not going to be able to do it. And make it public. Make the information public. Make the people that are already committed, that are involved, public, because that's an important part of us being social beings, it is to have that public announcement portion. Okay, so here I have some strategic communication tactics that we may consider. We kind of almost have an inverse pyramid here, and then the regular pyramid here to determine the regular pyramid is our persuasive impact. So if you're using advertising and promotional material, you have very little persuasive impact. It's the smallest part. However, over here, you reach the largest amount of audience. News media, we have a little more persuasive impact, and we still are reaching a large audience. Organizational media, we're expanding on our persuasive impact and moving towards our audience reach a little bit smaller over here. And interpersonal communication is really where we can be the most effective. So I keep mentioning those extension agents, but they're an opportunity for us to really have that interpersonal communication. And it doesn't have as much audience reach, but of course we have a lot of extension agents that we can use within the multiple states that we're talking about for our projects. Okay, interpersonal communication is certainly one of the things that is a big basis of community-based social marketing. So it is the most persuasive and engaging of all of the tactics, and they're controlled tactics. You have some control over the messages that are delivered, making sure that the right things are said, of course, provided that we provide the right education and the right materials to our agents specifically. They're generally inexpensive or moderate in cost, so we don't have to worry too much about that. And they should have a relationship with the target publics in order to be successful. Well, of course, again, our extension agents really fit this model. They already have relationships with the publics in the counties that we're talking about. And we can help achieve any acceptance objectives. So those are our objectives, basically, are to accept new behaviors. So the type of objectives that we're talking about for our campaigns can really be effective with these types of interpersonal communication. You do only reach a small number of people, of course, but again, we're talking about a large number of extension agents across multiple states. So a few more about communication tactics: personal involvement, organizational or site involvement. You can think of Disney's Animal Kingdom brings people there. They really get involved in the process of being a part of nature and being a part of a community. And then hopefully they move forward and take that back. Knocking on doors is another way of site involvement, just going to see people. And again, maybe it's not as literal as knocking on doors with our extension agent, but it's the same kind of concept. Information exchange, so exchange information with target publics. Educational gatherings, product exhibitions, meetings, rallies, speeches. Again, I'm talking about interpersonal communication tactics that could be really effective for our extension agents. Special events, so activities to create interaction with target audiences. Civic, sporting, contest, holiday, or social events, or even fundraising events have an opportunity for that. So really determining what's most important, we have to determine what's most important to your audience. Look at that intended audience and their needs. And you did some of that in your focus group analysis that you conducted, but continue doing that. You might have to do some additional information searches of where these audiences get information about changing agricultural techniques and climate science in general. Who do they trust? And where do they spend their time? Again, I've included some of this information that we have up on our K-State Online site, as well as in your transcripts, but you might have to do some additional gathering of some of this information. So after answering these questions, you should be really prepared to move to that next step, to really start developing your messages and choosing activities and materials that are appropriate to your audience. I'll continue and add a little bit more on the blog about things that you can do, but hopefully that gives you a broad overview of some of the things we're talking about when we talk about community-based social marketing.